Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about The Haunting of Blackwood House by Darcy Coates. And I want to give you a warning before I get any further. I did not finish this book. This was such a disappointment for me, because the first Darcy Coates book I read was exactly what I wanted in a haunted house book, and this one was sort of the opposite. So The Haunting of Blackwood House follows Mara, a young woman who grew up in a spiritualist family and is dealing with a lot of religious trauma built around that, while she goes about the process of buying and moving into a severely haunted house. When her realtor shows her Blackwood House, it seems too good to be true. If, like me, you see a haunted house in a movie and go, "Ooh, I want to live there." It's well under her budget, which is great. The house is huge, which is great. It's in need of serious repair, isolated, not wired for electricity, and oh yeah, there was a serial killer who lived there once and killed several children on the site. Mara is not concerned because she's a fierce, independent woman who doesn't believe in ghosts and has a boyfriend named Neil who is a carpenter and who is more than willing, like he's super willing, to come help her do the repairs on the place. But as soon as Mara moves in, the paranormal happenings start happening. And she dismisses them all, blaming wind, creaking old floorboards, intruders, and literally anything to avoid blaming ghosts. Neil is not so sure, but Mara is determined to make this place her home no matter what it throws at her. And yeah, I stopped reading at roughly page 232 out of 310 pages. So, a good bit into the book, only a little under 100 pages left to read. And there were many reasons why I could not convince myself to finish this thing. First, there's Mara herself. I'll admit that I did something that I don't usually do unless I am sure I'm going to DNF a book, and that is I checked out the reviews. When I realized that I was literally wanting to throw it, I went ahead and looked over the other reviews to see if it gets better, if the ending redeems it, or if just there's other people who agree with me. And so I can confirm, I am not the only one that found Mara utterly insufferable as a protagonist. In fact, a lot of the reviews were so much meaner than I intend to be that I was like, okay, that almost makes me want to read on just because I want to find something redeemable in her because those people are just being mean. But in the end, I couldn't read on. It was annoying me too much. Mara is determined to be independent to an infuriating level. The back of the book says that Mara and Neil buy the house together, and that is an absolute lie. Mara refuses to accept even a penny towards the house from him, even though at one point they do talk about the fact that the plan is for Neil to eventually move there with his aging mother. But she gets mad at him for buying her a couch as a housewarming gift, even though she literally owns no furniture. She gets irritated that he brought her a sleeping bag to sleep in because she was just planning on sleeping on the floor. And when they decide she needs security cameras, she throws an absolute tantrum about the fact that he wants her to get a good quality one and is willing to help her financially to get a good quality one. And she insists on buying the cheapest webcam available, which, yeah, backfires. And well, yeah, I know there are people like this in the real world. I'm not saying it's unrealistic. It's just not someone I really want to read for 300 pages. And it's one thing to be fiercely independent when you have the skills and resources to take care of yourself, but Mara doesn't! She doesn't have a car! She is living off of her savings because she's lost her job. She just bought a house that is miles from town, and she bought a house with holes in the walls and the roof with the assumption that Neil would help her repair them. She actually needs him to help her restore the place. She has to wait until he comes to get her because she doesn't have a car, and therefore she's relying on him for all of her rides anywhere. And after the first night, she doesn't even have a charged cell phone for the majority of the book because her cell phone dies and she doesn't bother asking him, can I charge my phone, like, anywhere? And that means she is completely trapped, isolated, unless he comes to get her. And throughout the majority of the book, she thinks there's an intruder getting into her house every night. Like an actual human being she thinks is running around the attic. And she doesn't have a lock on the attic door. She doesn't do anything about this. She talks about the fact that several of the windows are broken so someone could literally just walk into her house. And she doesn't accept any help with this. And like, her rejecting help is, at this point, isn't independence. It's stupidity. And the fact that she never shows the slightest reticence about accepting his help with construction feels like an absolute inconsistency when she's that stupid about accepting his help in any other way. And like, I get, once again, people are stupid. Like, this is not saying it's unrealistic. Like, it is realistic, but this is just not someone I want to hang out with for 300 pages. Then there's the fact that Mara is aggressively disparaging to anything she sees as religious or supernatural, to the point that she berates someone talking about their traumatic childhood for believing in ghosts. And yes, in that moment she does realize she's being an ass, but her boyfriend isn't allowed to mention his faith. When he dares suggest that she calls a priest, she freaks out at him, and she refuses to even spend a night in his house because his mom has religious things in the building. And I tried to forgive her for this dismissive attitude, because Mara is dealing with religious trauma, which I think is a topic that, yeah, a lot of books are tackling right now because a lot of people are beginning to recognize how some churches do the opposite of making people feel safe, loved, and welcome. Like, religious trauma is a real thing and worth being addressed in books. And yeah, that kind of trauma can cause people to overreact, to be a little bit less understanding of other people's relationship with the source of that trauma. And that could have been a really interesting personal arc for the book. Mara and Neil coming to a place where neither of them feel attacked by the other in their relationship with belief. Like, that is an interesting story. Mara coming to a place where she realizes that yes, she is allowed to disbelieve, but she's not allowed to dictate other people's belief. But no, that's not where we go with this. So the specific flavor of religious trauma Mara is dealing with is related to spiritualism, which the book does insist is still a widely practiced religion, which, yeah, depending on your definition of the word widely practiced, there are still people who practice the faith of spiritualism. But what the book shows of spiritualism looks almost exactly like a 1980s horror movie version of the practice. Now, I don't know anyone who openly proclaims themselves to be a spiritualist. I do know plenty of people who proclaim themselves to be spiritual, but that is a different thing. Spiritualism is a very specific thing. But I just have some qualms about the idea that real-world spiritualism looks and acts just like fortune tellers at a carnival. But also, I really don't think the book shows enough of what was traumatizing about growing up in this religion for the religious trauma narrative to really make sense. We get that Mara was forced to go to seances and that they gave her nightmares, though we don't actually get to see what happened at these seances that gave her nightmares. But also, Mara tells us that she wasn't allowed to have friends because her parents didn't want her hanging out with non-spiritualist kids, which, yeah, that's a source of trauma. That would work. But that's not enough background when the driving force of the book, when the driving force of the personal narrative is related to the religious trauma. Like, we needed more to see why it affected her so heavily. Instead, without that background, it really does start to feel like Mara is just overreacting. She's being overly sensitive and a little bit stupid about all of it. And then, spoilers ahead, if you want to read this book, stop watching now, because I'm straight up going to talk about shit that happens like 200 pages into the book. Mara comes home to find her boyfriend has invited mediums to her house to cleanse the space, and she rightly freaks the fuck out. Because, yeah, I agree with Mara here. Like, whether he is right or wrong, whether Mara has been unfairly dismissive of his beliefs before now, Mara has drawn a very clear boundary in the sand that she does not want anything spiritual or religious in her house, and she's allowed to make that boundary. And then Neil decides to just walk straight over the boundary and bring the exact source of her trauma straight into her house. And that all works. I read that scene with that feeling of, I don't really want to be reading this, like, I don't like this kind of conflict, but it makes sense in the narrative. And honestly, I feel like the breakdown of the perfect romantic relationship in a haunted house book is such an overdone element of haunted house books, but I get it. It's part of the tropes of the genre. I was accepting it, and I was just wondering where this is going next to make it make sense. And then, less than a page later, Mara just fucking decides to believe in ghosts. And therefore Neil was right all along. First, the paranormal happenings that inspire her change of heart are barely more dramatic than what she has seen like 5 times already. Like, yeah, the rocking chair is rocking, but it's done that every night. There's blood from nowhere, which is sort of new. But the thing is, there had been bloody handprints before, and there are now more bloody handprints. There's a cross stitch that gets creepier, and then she gets cut on her arm by a ghost. And you just cannot convince me that this character, who has managed to dismiss wailing chimneys, apparitions, footsteps from nowhere, bloody handprints, physically moving objects, and being locked in a fucking basement and almost freezing to death, this character isn't able to come up with an excuse for getting scratches on her arm when she's running through a house. Like, of course she would be able to dismiss that. And if we had had even a slight hint earlier in the book that Mara was questioning her skepticism, that she was going, I might be wrong, like, then it would have made a lot more sense. But no, the only time we see the girl panic and consider that maybe she should leave, she is thinking, oh, there's a person in my house. When she is in a full-on panic mode, she is still coming up with excuses, explaining away what is happening. But suddenly in this moment, she can't explain it away? And then that lack of logic spirals, because Mara starts thinking that she can't leave the house till morning because she has to walk, which she has never thought was a problem before. Like, she almost walked to town the second night she was there when she was by herself and she freaked out, and she only stopped because it was raining. But now, when it's not raining, suddenly she believes in ghosts, thinks her life is in mortal peril, and decides that she can't walk a couple miles in the dark and like all the way to town. Like, of course she can't do that. And even though she's thinking that the haunt is escalating, I am sitting there going, I don't think the haunt is escalating. You've just acknowledged it suddenly. And all of that is a side note to the problem that actually made me quit the book. This moment takes what could have been an interesting character journey, examining religious trauma and how it affects our lives and how it can make us, a bit too aggressive, and how, we need to heal from that, and wondering what healing from that looks like, and immediately turns it into a fuck your religious trauma, you're just wrong. For Mara to survive, she's going to have to acknowledge that everything she has rejected was actually right all along. And I have the sneaking suspicion that people who are dealing with religious trauma and therefore might be interested in Mara's journey here are going to find this conclusion a little bit upsetting. And I mean, I'm a Christian. I do believe in God. And even I can see that it would be pretty damn dismissive to tell people who are dealing with actual pain to just get over it and accept that this is salvation for you. And hell, to make it even worse, I glanced at the last page of the book, because that's another thing I tend to do if I'm going to DNF a book, and I saw that the last scene of the entire book is Mara calling her parents, who for most of the book she is referred to as abusive, to reconnect. And maybe, just maybe, we don't need a ghost story about how you should get over your religious trauma and reconnect with people who hurt you so badly that you have a panic attack when someone mentions the idea of calling a priest. Now, here's the thing. Do I think that any of this was malicious, like it was a message that the book was trying to get across? No. I do feel like this is one of those books that someone was just trying to write about something important, like religious trauma, and just didn't quite think through all of the implications of where the story was going to end up going. Honestly, this very much struck me as she sort of got trapped in her own narrative. Like, she had this brilliant idea and then made it near the end and realized there was no conclusion that thematically made sense. But that doesn't prevent me from hating what I was reading. But beyond that, I just wasn't really into this book as much as the previous one, even before it started really annoying me. Like, Blackwood House feels less like a living beast than Ashburn House did. I understand why the protagonist is staying here significantly less. Her isolation feels very self-imposed, which makes it harder for me to pity her. There's less of a mystery as to why the house is evil, and so there's less fun of the main character slowly finding out what's wrong with the house. And a lot of the book is built around Mara and Neil's relationship, and I hated their relationship. Neil is portrayed as this utterly perfect in every way, right up until he, destroys her trust, human being. And I hated that pretty much from the beginning. Neil's perfection just makes Mara seem even more like a bitch, because he's just trying to help. He's being so kind. He's being so understanding. And she's snapping at him, refusing every gift, closing him out, and eating his food. Which, yeah, the food is another important thing here, because, yes, I did forget to mention earlier when I talked about her accepting his help. Mara, Little Miss, I don't need your help for anything except for carpentry, also accepts rides from him pretty much everywhere, and pretty much just accepts that he feeds her for every meal without ever making a big deal about it. Like, she constantly accepts the fact that every time he comes to see her, he brings entire meals in bags. And instead, she just bitches about the fact that he always includes something healthy in it. And that's its own kettle of fish, because yeah, Mara and Neil, one of the only fights they have, other than the religious spiritualism kind of tension, is the fact that Neil consistently brings her healthy food and teases her about eating more healthy, which also sort of rubbed me the wrong way, considering Neil is described as this super, big, muscular, healthy carpenter guy, and we never get a physical description of Mara, but the way he's constantly nagging her about eating healthier, it really felt like someone very subtly fat-shaming their girlfriend. But other than that weirdness with food, he is too perfect for the book. Like, he is annoyingly perfect. And also, we don't get much of his identity outside of being a carpenter, being perfect, loving his mother, and the idea that he's a Christian. And then he betrays her, and the betrayal worked, but it felt like an annoying necessity in the narrative rather than, an actual logical step in his character arc. And other than that, there's just not too much to talk about with this book. The prose is fine, but never really jumped out at me. The little secondary characters felt a bit flat and stereotypical, especially the real estate agent, which I do not mind flat secondary characters. That's fine. But it doesn't give me anything to be like, oh, well, that's good. And with the real estate agent in particular, there's the joke about how her not understanding how the internet works, and it feels a little bit over the top. Like, I don't buy that a real estate agent in the era of cell phones could get away with not even knowing that the internet isn't a physical thing that you can install more of if you're lacking. And I struggle to suspend my disbelief when it comes to this early 20s girl who doesn't currently have a job, a car, or more furniture than a salvaged mattress on the floor, and yet she's able to buy a home? And, I know she was talking about buying a small apartment, and I know she was being super frugal to build up to it, but I'm just like, where is this? I would like to know where the fuck this girl can buy a house, because I sure as fuck can't. Also, the not having a job and not having a car and yet buying a house led me to being irrationally financially anxious for her without her ever acknowledging it. So it felt like a real disconnect to me, because I'm like, dude, why the hell aren't you out there getting a job? You just bought a house. You need a job, ma'am. You need a job. And I don't know. It's just, this one 100% did not work for me. I think other people might have a lot less problems with it, and I don't think that this is a death knell for Darcy Coates' books with me. I'm going to probably buy at least one more of hers and try it out and see if I like it, because the style of ghost story that she tells is exactly what I want in books. And so I probably will try more of hers. It's just, I don't think I'll ever convince myself to read the last 100 pages of this one. It's just not worth it for me.